everyone. So the materials that you're gonna need today are a pair of scissors. You're gonna need a crochet hook. I have the 5.0 millimeter or the H crochet hook. This is gonna depend on whatever yarn that you choose, but this works best for mine. And then you're gonna need a tapestry needle for when we sew in our ends. I have two colors I'm working with today. The first is Caron 1 pound. The color that I've chosen is Hosta. And then I also have Red Heart Super Saver Jumbo. I usually use Caron 1 pound, but this is what I had in stock with me today. So for today's bag, we're gonna go ahead and make 18 granny squares. So first we're gonna start with how to make a granny square. So to start with the granny squares, you're going to make what's called a magic circle. I'm gonna show you my technique. I will go under the first, over the second, and I'll pull it back through, right? So that's looking like a slip knot. And then I will twist it, and then we have this circle to work with. I'm going to chain 2 because we're going to be doing double crochets. Now this chain 2 does count as a stitch. In order to get 16 stitches in this magic circle, we already have 1. So we're going to stitch 15 double crochets essentially along this yarn. We're going to yarn over, insert your hook into the circle, yarn over again, pull up a loop, and then complete the double crochet like normal. And so that's 1 of 15. We got 2 and 15. Now, as always, whenever you're doing a magic circle, you want to make sure that this end is somewhere that you can find at the end. Just like a slip knot, how you can sort of make it looser, we're going to pull this tight, and that is what is going to create our circle. In order to connect your last double crochet with your first double crochet, you're going to insert your hook into the top of the first double crochet, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through the loop already on your hook. You want to chain 2. We have 16 double crochets here. We're going to stitch 2 double crochets into the top of each of these. This chain 2 counts as a stitch, and so you're gonna be stitching 31 double crochets. The first one here where your chain is in, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through 2, and into the same space that you just did that double crochet, you will yarn over, again insert in that same space, yarn over, and that is gonna be 2 double crochets in 1 space. If your granny square is doing what mine is doing here, you don't really need to worry about it looking too much like a donut. When we sew in our ends, once our granny square is complete, I'll show you a trick to get this to stay nice and tight and closed. So now we're gonna do this for the rest of this circle here. All right, so we're doing our last 2 double crochets. So you'll see that we have these 2 spaces left. So we'll do 1, that's stitch 30. Nope, just kidding, that's stitch 29. That's stitch 30. And then again, this chain 2 counts as a stitch. So in order to have 2 in this space, all you need to do is 1 last stitch. And that is 31 double crochets plus the chain 2 to get 32 in total. Just like the last time, you're gonna insert your hook into the top of the first double crochet and slip stitch through. And then again, chain 2. And now what you're gonna do is you're gonna stitch in a pattern of 1 double crochet in this space, 2 double crochets in this space, 1 double crochet in this space, 2 double crochets in this space. And you'll repeat that all the way around. And by the end of this row, you're gonna have 48 stitches. So because this chain 2 counts as a stitch, you're gonna be stitching 47 double crochets. So we will do 1 double crochet in this first space, and then we will do 2 into the next space. And then we will do 1 into this next space, and 2 into the next. And you will do this all the way around. You should have 47 double crochets plus the 1 chain 2. Make sure you count when you get to the end of the row, and I will see you there. Okay, so we're at the end of this row. You should have 2 spaces left. One is the top of the last double crochet from the previous row, and then you have the chain space. So if you have done this correctly, counted correctly, the stitch before is 2 double crochets. So this one here is going to be 1 double crochet. And if you remember, at the very beginning of the row, we also only had 1 double crochet, which means that this chain here should be essentially 2 double crochets. This chain 2 is already one of them, and so all we need to do is stitch 1 more double crochet into the chain space. And then we are going to again slip stitch into the previous row. 1, 2. So we have finished the circle part of our granny square. What we're going to move on to now is to essentially square it out. So this is another granny square that I have finished. We are going to work on essentially getting these corners now. So this is going to be a pattern of working in 3s. We are going to start with double crochets. So we're going to count once again this chain 2 as a stitch. So in this stitch right here, this very first one, we are going to chain 2 double crochets. Okay, and with that chain 2, we can sort of count this as our first double crochet, or this 3 cluster. Then what we're going to do is we're going to skip 1, 2, and work into the 3rd double crochet from where your hook is. We are going to stitch 3 treble or 3 triple crochets. So that's going to be yarn over twice, insert your hook, yarn over, and then we pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2. We're going to do this twice more in the same space. And now we're going to create our corner. So in order to do that, we're going to chain 2 right on the top of that last triple crochet, and in the same space that your triple crochets were in, we're going to do 3 more triple crochets. So again, yarn over twice, insert it into that same space, and 1, 2, 3, and 2 more times. Now next we are going to skip this first one, skip the second one, and in this 3rd space from where your hook is, you're going to do 3 double crochets. Once again, you're going to skip 1, 2 stitches, and then in the 3rd one from where you're currently at, now we're going to do 3 half double crochets. So you yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through all 3 loops on your hook. We're going to do 2 more of these into the same space. Next, as always for this row, we're skipping 2, and in the 3rd stitch from where you're at, you're back to 3 double crochets. You can imagine that these that you just stitched are basically equivalent to what you have stitched here, meaning that we are now moving on to our next corner. Okay, so we have the cluster of 3 double crochets, 3 half double crochets, 3 double crochets. These make up the sides of the granny square, and then the 3 triple crochets, chain 2, 3 triple crochets into the same space make up our corners. So after doing these double crochets, next we are making the next corner. So we skip 1, we skip 2, and then into this stitch here, we're going to stitch 3 triple crochets. Okay, and then we're going to chain 2, and then we're going to do 3 triple crochets into this same space. Okay, so now as you can see, we have 2 corners for a granny square. We are going to essentially just keep repeating this order. So we have 3 triple crochets, chain 2, 3 triple crochets in the same space. We have that here, and we have this in our second corner. Now, after we do these, triple crochet clusters here in this corner space, you're gonna skip 2, and then do 3 double crochets in the same stitch, skip 2, 3 half double crochets in the same stitch, skip 2, 3 double crochets in the same space, skip 2, and you're onto your corner. And you can actually see here the stitches that I've skipped. 1, 2, those were skipped. 1, 2, those were skipped. So you're gonna be able to see as you go. I'm gonna finish up this granny square, and then we're gonna talk about weaving in our ends. Okay, so our last 3 half double crochets in the same space. And like always, we are going to now connect our 2 sides with a slip stitch into the top of that first double crochet. and then we'll pull the yarn out, and then the piece that is hanging out here, I will pull it tight. It essentially knots itself. So we have our completed granny square. I always like to weave in my ends into the back. So we are going to thread through our tapestry needle. What I like to do first is get a sense of what direction the yarn is going. If you want to work on clothing the middle hole that pops up, you want to start by going in the direction that your yarn is already moving. So it's coming from this direction here. And so what I'm going to do is start by weaving this yarn just through the double crochets. Pull that through. And I'll go almost all the way around, and then maybe I'll go through a couple more. And then what this allows you to do is when you pull this nice and tight, now when you continue weaving in your ends, it will essentially keep this as tight as however you pull it when you weave in your ends. And so now is the point, once you've sort of gone around once, this is where I'll start, changing directions, making it harder for that piece of yarn to wiggle its way through. I usually try to go through to a different row entirely. You can see here I'm even splitting the yarn. I find that sometimes to be helpful. And then what I'll do whenever I get to the next row is just go in that opposite direction. You just sort of want to encourage the yarn to not go back from where it came. And then I will usually pull that tight, and then I will loosen the granny square. And once this is thoroughly threaded through, now we are going to weave in the end from the top here. This is really on the front side of this granny square. So what I'm going to do is essentially coax it through to the back of the granny square. As you can also tell just by nature of how these connect, you'll see that the space between these 3 double crochets and the half double crochets, this space is bigger than this one here. What we're going to do essentially is tuck that yarn into that space, and it helps even it out to make it look a little bit more seamless. And we are literally just going to pass it through that space, which will increase the space between these two, make it look a little bit more natural. And it also gets the yarn onto this bad, ugly side that we want to be weaving into anyways. I think the biggest thing here is just making sure that it kind of goes in all different directions. And so I will cut that last piece. So this is going to be the pattern that we're going to be making today in terms of how we put together the side of the bag. I already have one side completed, and you can see here, this is really what we're going for. This was a tic-tac-toe game that I did with my partner a couple of weeks ago when I was designing this bag, but I do think that it's a way to make the bag more personal. You can make both sides identical. You can make one side one that you won, one that somebody else won, or you can totally just make it up. For this, I'm gonna need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 X's, and then I'm gonna need 4 O's. So go ahead and make your tic-tac-toe board, then determine how many of the X's and O's that you need. All right, so our next step is we're gonna do what is called tapestry sewing.
Hey, so this is definitely not called tapestry sewing. This is called surface crocheting. I'm not sure where I got that term from. I know tapestry sewing is a thing, tapestry crochet, who knows? I'm gonna call it that about 1,000 more times, but this is called surface crocheting, okay? Great.
We're essentially going to use our crochet hook to make slip stitches around the circle. The trick here is that we are going to follow this line. I'm going to keep this to the side just so you can have a reference for what we're doing. So we're going to start by making a slip knot, and you're going to take your hook. I usually like to start in the corner spaces just because there is a decent amount of room. So you'll see here, we're going to just insert our hook. We're going to put our slip knot, tighten it to our yarn, and then I like to hold this back tail, and you're essentially going to pull this loop through to the front. So keep the knot best you can on the back, and again, sometimes holding this keeps it from pulling through, but we just want a little bit of that loop right here. So what you're gonna do is you will insert your hook, you're gonna yarn over behind the granny square, you're gonna pull through, and then this loop is going to pull through the loop already on your hook. You're going to do this again. You will insert into the top of the next double crochet from that row, yarn over behind, pull through, and then you're going to pull the new loop through the loop that was already on your hook. You don't want this to be too tight, but as you can see already, this is how we get that shape all the way around. And so I will just demonstrate this a few more times. Insert our hook, yarn over behind the granny square and pull through, and then pull that new loop through the loop already on your hook. And we're gonna do this all the way around. So we're on our last of these slip stitches, or I would say last two really. You're gonna insert into that same corner space that you started in, yarn over, pull through, okay? But then we want to connect the circle. So what you're gonna do for the very last stitch is you're gonna insert your hook in between. Do you see how this is like a V? You're gonna insert your hook in between that space, yarn over, pull through, and pull through. You'll pull that through. For weaving in this end, get your tapestry needle. If you look, if you pull your yarn, you see how that's pulling in this direction so it blends in well with the others? What you wanna do is you wanna find the next slip stitch and push your needle through that. This also gets the yarn on the other side, pulling it through. And so with this here in the back, I will just weave this in like I do any other stitch. And then this is gonna be our finished granny square from today. The only shape we have left to make is the X. Here's one that is already completed. What you're gonna be doing is exactly what you just did, except that you're gonna go from one corner to the other corner. It can be a little bit difficult to keep this exactly straight, so don't be afraid as you're going to pull out and try again if you just wanna make sure that you get these lines as straight as possible. You're gonna take that same contrasting color, you're gonna make your slip stitch, and just like before, you are going to start by inserting your hook into a corner. This time we're gonna be moving this way, so you're gonna have your hook sort of down here. Find your slip stitch, and you will tighten it onto your hook. I will just pull this loop through. And then what I want to attempt to do is to make slip stitches in the straightest possible line from here to the center of the granny square. So you'll see that I'll usually go in the middle of a row, and then I'll usually go maybe into like the top of a row, middle of a row, top of a row, middle of a row, center. So we're just eyeing this here. Insert my hook, yarn over in the back of the granny square as before. Whoop. Pull through. Whoop. It's a little bit tight there, but that's okay. Again, we are getting ourselves as straight as possible to the center, so that looks like a great place to go next. Yarn over behind the granny square, pull through. So we will insert next into the middle of that stitch. Yarn over on the back, pull through and pull through. And let's go here, yarn over, pull through. And then I will go usually in the middle here, yarn over, pull through, into the middle, yarn over, pull through. Let's see how we did. Not perfectly straight, pretty good. So we're gonna keep going all the way until the other corner. And so we'll do our last stitch now into the corner space. Okay, and pull through, pull your yarn out. We have one line. So we're gonna make our slip knot, take our crochet hook, insert it into the bottom corner. We will put our slip knot onto our hook and pull it, hold the tail on the back, pull the loop through. And we want to try to go straightest line. Go here, yarn over on the back, pull through. Now, once we get to the center, I actually like to go on this sort of inner side. So before the last line, pull through, and then in the center space again, I'll usually just overlap. It's still in that center circle, overlap right over the previous line that we stitched. But you can really guarantee that the X crosses over pretty evenly. And then of course, we are just going to continue this until this corner space. And last stitch, insert it into the corner space, pull through. All I'm gonna do now is weave in my ends. Similar to how I did before, any ends that are out here in the front, I either, before I put it through my tapestry needle or after, I simply will pull it to the back and then weave it into the back like normal with both of these ends. And then I will see when it's time to start constructing the side of the bag. Once you have all of your granny squares, pull the granny squares for the first two columns, doing this stitch here. Okay, start by making a slip knot. So we're going to start with the bottom row. We're going to start by stitching up the seam between these two stitches. I have a slip knot here ready to go, waiting for me. And for these stitches, we are going to work only in the back loop. The back loop is this loop here. Okay, this is the back loop. And if you think about it, it's the loop that is on the back of the granny square. For the O, same logic, it's the loop on the back, essentially, of the granny square. It's important as you go that each loop that you're stitching through matches up with the opposite granny square. So for example, your 3 half double crochets will line up. Your 3 double crochets, when stitched together, will line up. So that is a way that you can keep track. I will start with the one on the right side. You'll see that this is the top of a triple crochet on the side facing you. I want to start in the chain space next to that. This way we get, I think, better corners. So I'm going to insert into that back loop, and then we are going to look here at the O, and we have the top of the triple crochet just like we did on the other one. And then we have 2 chains. So we're going to use this space right here. So top of the triple crochet, and we are going to insert into that chain space. This is the part where I will put my slip knot on. As you go through this, your string is actually going to be here in the back, and we're going to pull it through this, and we will pull it through that one as well. And we're just going to do this all the way up, where we insert into the next back loop on the right, insert into the next back loop on the left. So we'll start now, inserting into the next back loop. Okay, and then we'll find the next back loop here. That's right there. Insert our hook. We will yarn over and pull it through all 3. And then we will do it again. We're looking for the next back loop. As you can see, this is going to be the top of that triple crochet. So we want to make sure that the next back loop we're looking for is the top of the triple crochet on the next side, which it is. We will insert into the back loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. I'm going to do this a few more times, and then you'll be able to see exactly how this is working up. So we're going to do this all the way up the seam between these granny squares. So we're coming to the end of the seam here. If the explanation that I have given you is not as clear, feel free to go ahead and YouTube this, look for other tutorials. It is a very common joining stitch for granny squares. I've gone almost all the way to the end, but I just wanted to point out what I mentioned about symmetry. For example, these line up. We have almost lining up with the half double crochet. This was where I slip stitched in, so those are always going to be a little bit off. And then of course my last stitch here was into the top of this triple crochet and into the back loop of that triple crochet. You'll remember here that we started in the back loop of the first essentially chain. So here we have 1 chain, 2 chains. So we're going to do both of these. We're going to work into them. So you'll know that you're done when the next stitch that you could, but won't, put could stitch into is the top of a triple crochet on this side and the top of a triple crochet on that side. What you're going to do is you are going to pull through. Now, instead of cutting this off, we are going to keep going. So next on my pattern are 2 X's. You are going to once again search for that chain that you want to start in. So here is the top of a triple crochet, and you want to go into the back loop of the next stitch. So here's where we're going to insert our hook. Okay. And then on the next one, again, you want to find that same space on the next granny square. So we have the top of the triple crochet here, and you want to go into the back loop of the next stitch. So we are going to be going right in here. Yarn over and pull through. And now we are going to do the same thing and just work up these next 2 granny squares just to demonstrate. So into this next back loop,
and then into this back loop here. Same as before, we will yarn over and pull through all the loops. Although we do have this bit here, we will do the same thing sideways, and that will fix this up. So you don't need to worry about that right now, but we will just continue working this all the way up here. We're gonna connect the next two granny squares. So next on our design here is an X and an O. We will eventually connect these in the exact same way in these corners that I just connected the first two. So I will see you back at the very top of this column. Right, I'm just pulling through the very last of the slip stitches. Cut it. This is an end we'll eventually weave in. So as you can see, that matches these two columns here. And so what I'm gonna do, just like I did here on this side where I started at the bottom and I went all the way up, I'm gonna do that exactly the same on this side here. Now you actually have essentially the size that your bag is going to be. You have your design ready to go. All you have left is to stitch horizontally across. So you can see that when you stitch horizontally across, similar to when you stitched your X's and you went from one side of the line you already had stitched and then right over to the other, you'll do a similar thing in the corner here. So you'll see that I inserted right before the vertical line and right directly after the vertical line. Otherwise, these rows are exactly the same. This is just a way to make this corner nice and crisp. Only thing that you really need to, battle with a little bit here is the fact that you have these, it's just sort of flimsy, flappy all over the place. So as you go up, you do kind of have to work in this in-between pocket space. So here's what I mean about there being very little room. So your yarn is really coming from the back. So as always, we're gonna find our next back loop on the right side, and we are going to find our next back loop on the left. And then this string, which you wanna keep behind, see it's that easy. Back loop, okay. The string that you wanna keep behind, you wanna yarn over, make sure you have enough tension that you can pull it through. Once you get to the corner space, you are going to see that the next loops that you're going to insert your hook in are the same loops that you have already stitched. This way you get a really nice closed corner, but it's also how you're gonna go on this side of the line you already have and onto the next. So we are going to pick up this stitch here, and then we are going to pick up the stitch here. Now we are sort of in this next space, yarn over, pull through, and then again, you are going to be using these loops that you have already stitched in. So insert your hook on this one, and again, look for the stitch that has already been stitched in, insert your hook there, and then yarn over and pull through. And officially then you have made your cross section. You're gonna do this all the way back up. You are going to connect this corner just like you did this one here. And then you're gonna do the same thing starting at the bottom here and going all the way up. All right, so here are all of the connected granny squares. As you can see, I did the flat slip stitch seam all the way up each of the columns and all the way across. Now, this is a great example of why it's really helpful to have this drawn out. So I just finished this in this direction, but as you can see, I actually wanted it that way. So it's nice if you have this drawn out and you can reference it because you won't necessarily be able to look at this and see what direction you want it to go. So what we're gonna do now is we are going to add a little bit of a border. So this is my other finished half, and I just have a little bit of this border here really to just sort of flatten out the squares a bit. I like the way that it corners off, but also I think that it can really reinforce the bottom and the sides of the bag. When it comes to this bag, different than a regular granny square bag, because this is actually a picture, right? This is actually a tic-tac-toe. I don't want this to sort of curl under or the part that's really bearing weight. So by adding this little extra border, our hope, right, is that it would bend here and keep the tic-tac-toe board intact once we have things in your bag. This
is actually quite simple. We're just gonna do 4 rows of single crochets all the way around 3 of the sides. This is my top edge, so we're essentially gonna start here and go down and all the way around and end here. We are going to start with our slip knot, and this is my top corner. Again, reference your picture so that you know which way you're going. So just like when we were doing the flat slip stitch, we're going to be finding our triple crochet and entering, putting our hook into the chain space right next to it. Then you can go ahead and slip your slip knot on. Now we're just gonna be doing single crochets. So in this case, I'm gonna recommend you pull this through and chain 1, and then you simply do our single crochets in the top of every stitch. Okay, so we have finished the first side here. Now I'm at the corner space. You'll see that I did my last single crochet right here, I guess at the top of this triple crochet. This is gonna be the next, stitch where there's a top. I'm just gonna crochet right into this big gap of the corner space. So I'm gonna do 3 single crochets into this space. So insert my hook, yarn over, pull up, got 1, insert again into that big gap, 2 and 3, and then I'm going to rotate. We're going to start on our next side, and our first stitch on this side here is going to be the top of this triple crochet. Now this might feel like a little bit of a big gap right now. I don't think you need to worry about it. I'll show you a finished one. This will be at the bottom of your bag. So what you can do if you are worried about this is you can always sew these pieces together. You could go on the back here and just do a little bit of a connector yarn between the two, but I've never had anything fall through one of these bags. And typically a tote bag this big, I'm usually not carrying teeny tiny little things in crochet bags anyways, but otherwise I really wouldn't worry about this gap space. Once it is all said and done, it really isn't that big. So all we're gonna do now is we are going to continue along this side. We're gonna complete this corner the way we just completed this one. I will see you again when we are at the top of the tote bag. Right, so we are at the end of the last side for our first row of these single crochets. Just finishing up. Okay, and if you remember on the other side, our first stitch was the one next to the triple crochet. So this is going to be our last stitch. What we're gonna do here is chain 1, and then we're gonna flip. And you're just gonna do the same thing. You're gonna work along the edge here with single crochets. When you get to your corner space, as you can see, we have 3 corner stitches. And this time you just work your 3 stitches in one space into the middle of those. And you're just gonna continue working along the edge, flipping the bag, working along the edge, flipping the bag. Your last row will actually be on the back of the bag, and I will see you when we have finished this border and are ready to put the bag together. So we're on our last single crochet of row 4 of our little border around our now attached granny squares. Okay, except what we're gonna do, we're not going to cut this. So I'm gonna make it a little bit long just to show you what we're gonna do next. We have our completed side here. We have our other completed side once you have done both. We are going to connect these with the flat slip stitch, just like we did with the granny squares. Now, you can put them together with a stitch marker if that's helpful for you, but biggest thing is just imagining them like they are another granny square. I now have my bag upside down. All right, so just like we did with the granny squares, we're simply going to be working into the back loop of our single crochets. Our very first one is this one here. So keeping this still attached so we don't have to weave in any ends, we are going to insert our hook into this back loop here. And then we are going to insert our hook into basically the single crochet that you just did, to the back loop. You want your yarn to run behind the pieces that you're putting together. And then you simply yarn over and pull through. I'll do a couple more and then I will show you how this is looking. So insert into the back loop, insert into the next back loop, and then yarn over and pull through. Again,
insert into the back loop, insert into the back loop, yarn over, and pull through. Now, if you want to, you can actually do this with your contrasting color. That's going to be personal preference. For me, I just want these to sort of all seamlessly blend together. So all I'm going to do is do this flat stitch all the way up, and then I will show you how we're going to work the corners. So I am at the end of putting the first two sides together, so you can see the seam here a little bit better. The nice thing about doing the flat slip stitch is that for granny squares like this, it lays quite flat, but when we're using it as the side, it actually holds it up and bends quite well right where we want it to. So it ends up being a really nice seam for a bag. At this corner space, it really is going to be the same as before. You just really want to keep track of those back loops. So here I have worked into these two back loops, and we're not going to be adding any extra stitches. We are simply going to be putting the bag all the way together and just making sure that we're not losing any loops, and making sure that we are now moving in this new direction up the different sides of this bag. So I will do a few of them and we will get the corners formed. Okay, and then that gives you a really nice, really good corner. And again, this is why I say not so much to worry about this gap, because it really doesn't sit in the bottom corner of your bag here. So if you have lip gloss, other things, they're really not going to fall out this far up the bag when this is going to be your side and your bottom. So continue working your seam all the way across the rest of the side. Make sure just to pay attention at the next corner like you did here, and then I will meet you back when you have finished putting the third side together. Right, so we have finished the flat slip stitch up the sides of the bag. But what we're going to do now is we are going to stitch in around the top. We're just going to use single crochets. We're going to do 2 rounds of single crochets, and then we're going to do the handles. So I am at the top of my flat slip stitch. I believe I've left myself one more just to show you what it looks like. This is the very first stitch from the last row into that back loop, and then the very first stitch on this side of the back of the last row. Insert there, and we have our last flat slip stitch. So in order to start stitching along this end here, I'm simply going to chain 1. Whenever you are stitching horizontally along the side, you just kind of have to eye it. So if you start doing your single crochets, if it's curling, then it's too tight. If it's wavy and bunching, then you have too many stitches. So I'm just gonna go ahead. Every couple of stitches, I'll take a look. This looks pretty flat, and so I'm feeling good about how many stitches I have distributed there. And then once you pass just these couple of rows, you are back to simply stitching 1 stitch at the top of each stitch. I am simply going to do single crochets along this end. I'm going to do it all the way around, and then I will show you how to connect the other side. So I'm at the end of the very first row, and then I'm going to find the top of our first single crochet, and that's going to be here, and I will just do a slip stitch. And then I have now connected the 2 sides. I will stitch 1, and then I'm going to do 1 more layer of single crochet before I get onto the handles. So I am at the end of the second single crochet row at the top of our tote bag. And so I just have a few stitches left. Okay, and then this is the slip stitch from our previous row. So we're not going to stitch into that. Instead, we are going to slip stitch into the beginning of our row. We are going to chain 1. Those are now connected. For the third row, this is where we are going to decide where and how long our handles are. One nice thing about this bag is that these lines can act as where to center your handles. I'm going to sort of count. This is right in line with our slip stitch here, and I'll go 1, 2. So I am going to single crochet right to this point, and then I am going to show you how to form the handle. So I'm going to go 1, and then I'm going to go 2,
Now what we're going to do is we are going to chain as many chains as the length of the handle that we want. So I think that 100 chains can be a good length. What I recommend is maybe starting with 100, and then we will slip stitch into essentially the opposite but equal stitch on this side. So if this is the top of our line, if you keep connecting it up, this would be the top. So 1, 2 inward, you will slip stitch into here, and I'll show you with mine. But you might want to slip stitch, and then you can even try the bag on. You can see where it falls from your shoulder, and then depending if you want it shorter, take out a few of the chains. If you want it longer, add to that. So I'm going to chain 100, and then I will come back to slip stitch with you. So I have now chained 100. In this case, you really want to make sure that you have chained exactly the number that you mean to. You want to make sure that your straps are of equal length. So before you slip stitch, it's important that you flatten out your chains. You don't want these to be twisted, because then your stitches will be twisted when we're stitching into this. So from here, what we're gonna do, again, if we were to follow this line as if it were imaginary, this would be the stitch that runs, I would say, at the top of this imaginary line. And so we wanna go 1, 2 stitches inward, just like we started this part of the handle, 1, 2 stitches inward. So this is where we are going to slip stitch. All we're going to do is insert our hook into the top of the stitch, yarn over, pull through, and then you're gonna pull through on the loop. It's part of your handle. So then all we're going to do is start our single crochets again. And you're gonna do this all the way around, but when you get to the other side of your bag, you are going to do the exact same thing that you did here. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. Maybe you started yours 2 from the outside. Maybe you started them all the way out here. It's totally up to you, but whatever you did on this side, do it identically on the other side of the bag. And then, just like the other side, we are going to simply single crochet until we meet the beginning of this row. And then this is the slip stitch from the row below, so we're not going to stitch into that. Instead, we are going to insert our hook into the top of the first stitch from this row and slip stitch into it. I'm going to chain 1, and now what we're going to do is another row of single crochet. So from this point on, we are just doing rows of single crochet. When you get to the handle, I'll show you how we'll kind of reinforce it by doing what we call decreases at this point. But for however thick you want your handles to be, that is how many rows to do. So there are a few different ways that you can do this decrease. Because I want my handles a little bit straighter, I'm actually going to use these 2 stitches here, because what the decrease is going to do is essentially pull this back a little bit. And at this point, there's 1 single crochet holding up your entire handle. So this kind of helps reinforce it from the other side. So in order to do a single crochet decrease, all we're gonna do is insert our hook like we would normally, yarn over like normal, but instead of yarning over and pulling through 2 loops, we're gonna yarn over and just pull through 1, okay? Then, without finishing this stitch, we are going to insert our hook into the top of the next stitch. Just like normal, again, we're gonna yarn over and pull through, but instead of pulling through the rest of the loops, we're gonna yarn over and just pull through the first one. Now I'm gonna do 1 more, and so we are officially then starting to stitch into our handle. When stitching into the handle, it's like stitching into any chain stitch. The biggest thing is making sure that you're not twisting as you stitch. I'm going to stitch right into this loop here, and then once again, we're gonna yarn over, and we're only gonna pull through 1 stitch. So at this point, you're gonna have 4 loops on your hook. You have essentially a half single crochet, if you will. So half a stitch, half a stitch, half a stitch. And then we are going to finish off all of them in 1. And so we yarn over and pull through all of them. Now the reason that we call this a decrease is because this just went from 3 stitches to 1. So all of these 3 stitches now share 1 top single stitch. So for the next row, we will similarly work 1, 2, and then this loop, which will become the top of our next stitch. So in this way, it really reinforces the handle here, but it's called a decrease because where there once was 3, there is now 1 stitch. So what I'm gonna do is I will then continue working single crochets, and it's just one into each. So I have stitched a single crochet into all of my 100 chains. Now what I'm gonna do is a decrease coming off the end of this handle here. So I have 1 and 2 chains left to stitch into. So I'm just gonna do a regular single crochet into the first one. Now, if you remember on the other side, we did a decrease with the 2 single crochets leading to the handle and then the 1 single crochet, or I'm sorry, the 1 chain of the handle. So we are just going to mirror that on the other side. So we are going to insert our hook, we are going to yarn over, and again, we are only going to pull through 1 loop. Then we're going to insert into our first single crochet, pull through, and then yarn over, and again, only pulling through that first loop. And one last time, inserting, yarn over, and pull up, and we are only pulling through 1 loop. So you'll know you'll be ready to pull through all of the loops when there are 4 loops on your hook. You will yarn over, and you will pull through all 4. And once again, we have now made 3 single crochets, 1. And that's why it's called a decrease. You will do exactly the same thing with the handles on the other side. And from this point on, you're really just going around and around, connecting your rounds with a slip stitch until your handles are as thick as you want them to be. So I ended up actually doing 4 rows. You can see here where the increases cut into the rows that we have at the top of the bag. This really enforces the handle so that you can carry heavier things. This is all personal preference, and I just wanted to show you how I end the bag. So I just have a few more stitches. We have 1, 2, and then as always, this is the slip stitch from the last row. We do not stitch into that. And then we just slip stitch, pull this long, tighten that, and then just weave this in like normal. And then that is your bag. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Also, if you're looking for a written version of this pattern, you can find it on my Etsy shop. It's gonna be malcolmmadeco.etsy.com. I'll be running a sale for when this first comes out if it's no longer on sale. If you purchase any of my patterns, you get 10% off the next pattern. So if you're looking for a written version, go check out my Etsy, but I will see you guys in the next video.